There are probably 10,000 reasons why we would want to genetically design a human, but the biggest reason is guarantees. In this godless world that is dubbed the 21st century, it seems that destiny must be taken out of God's domain and placed in man's domain. Genes provide the illusion of a crystal ball on the future. Certain genes, they say, produce Einsteins and piano virtuosos. Other genes produced homosexuals and serial killers. Some say we could have a better world if it was made up of better people. If the genes which produce socially undesirable traits such as rapists could be removed. Socially undesirable, however, is not a black and white issue. We could all agree that serial killers and rapists are not socially acceptable, and some may extend to say that people with Down syndrome are not socially acceptable based upon their contribution to our materialistic lifestyle. The question becomes clear: what is socially acceptable and what is not? Already, prenatal sex discrimination has the potential to create a sexual imbalance with global consequences. Scientists can now almost guarantee that a family wanting only boys get a boy. In China, the extreme population control policy of one child per family means that baby girls are often murdered at birth. In India, the social significance of boys is so great that abortion of girls after prenatal screening was so high that in 1994 the government banned such practices. The effects of this evil practice would take less than 2 generations to cause catastrophic social problems. A complete sex imbalance would ultimately lead to our destruction. Genetics has allowed a very detailed sneak preview into the future of the unborn child. Embryos which have unsuitable genes can be simply aborted. Who is to say what their true potential could be? Many people with physical disabilities have made exceptional contributions to arts and science. The argument that genetic engineering can be used to remove socially negative traits such as serial killers, manic depressants, etc., may be to some extent true in the near future, but what other traits will that same society deem eliminatable? What kind of world will we be ushering in where a child is born and based upon his genes be placed in a genetic class system that already has found him or her guilty of murder? The justification behind prenatal genetic screening is based on what some lobbyists say is a parent's right to a healthy child. But where is the line going to be drawn? Does the prejudice stop at serial killers, or does it carry over to people with IQs below 80? The most beautiful reasons for designer humans, should parents have a boy or a girl, blue eyes or brown eyes, dark skin or light skin, it is all a mere temptation. Unlike the laws of God, society's views on issues change with passing time, so today's views may not be shared by tomorrow's generation. Where genetic engineering gets most of its applause is in the field of medicine. The medical application for genetics is very broad. Breast cancer is the commonest form of cancer that affects women. Over 15,000 women die from this disease every year, and of that approximately 10% are due to faulty genes. Women who have a family member with breast cancer have an 8 times greater chance of developing the disease. Gene research has assisted in the detection of bowel cancer, cystic fibrosis, Huntington's chorea, Alzheimer's, to name but a few. July 1999 made history when, by genetic manipulation, a healthy cell was made cancerous. Previous studies stimulated cancer in normal human cells by exposing the cells to toxic chemicals or radiation. However, researchers were unable to control the type of genetic damage caused by such exposure. As a result, they remained unsure about which of the induced genetic flaws actually produced the cancer, and which did. The new discovery gives unprecedented insight into the mystery behind cancer and brings mankind one step closer to a cure. Although scientists have made large steps in understanding the chemicals at play in our bodies, they are so complicated that they cannot be manufactured in a chemical laboratory. Scientists have solved this problem by genetically reprogramming cells in isolation to act as factories and produce chemical substances. One of the most popular cases of this kind is chemical insulin, which was genetically engineered in 1982 as a medical treatment for diabetics. Great success has been achieved in making substances that stimulate the production of white blood cells, the body's defense system against infection. To increase the production of these biological factories, whole animals such as genetically reprogrammed mice have been used to produce large quantities of biological substances. Insulin is currently drawn from cows and pigs, but this has impurities. The actual coding for insulin production is unknown, and some scientists employ a random approach by using enzymes to break down the genes. The genes are then inserted into bacteria and monitored to see what happens. If luck strikes and the bacteria starts producing insulin, then bingo, the gene sequence for insulin production would have been discovered. The same technology that can be used to clone human beings can be used to clone skin cells. Entire sheets of skin could be genetically grown in the lab for patients suffering from extensive third-degree burns. The advantage with using genetics is that it eliminates the common problem of tissue or organ rejection. From chemicals which treat kidney disorders and drugs which treat rheumatoid arthritis to cancer, all produced from genetic engineering, making this revolutionary technology very hard to ignore. However, there is a dark side to the genetic solutions. Picture gene programming just like computer programming. What happens when a mistake is made? And how long will it take before it is identified, and then maybe by then it will be too late for most of the victims? A well-known example of this is what happened to 10,000 women in the UK and 2 million women in the USA. A drug abbreviated as DES, which was developed to reduce miscarriages. 20 years later, it was found that a generation segment in the community was developing vaginal and cervical cancer. It was later discovered that the daughters of the women that had taken DES were 1,000 times more likely to develop the cancer. This revelation came 20 years too late for many. In our midst, there is a killer that threatens humanity's continuing dominance on the planet. A four-letter killer: AIDS. Contemporary speculation has it that HIV was engineered or allowed to mutate as a biological weapon in the late 1950s. Previous Western propaganda had it that AIDS came about when Africans had sexual relations with monkeys. In the UK, AIDS is particularly frequent within the male homosexual communities. But diseases are blind to race, religion, power, wealth, sex, and all the things visible to our eyes. The World Health Organization predicts that 10 million children will be orphaned by AIDS, and another 10 million born with the disease within the next 10 years. Cures for this devastating disease using classical vaccination methods have failed. Vaccines work on the principle that a small dosage of the virus pre-injected into a subject would stimulate the body's natural defense system. The body produces a kind of record of the battle in the form of antigens, which help the next time the body encounters the virus. This has failed primarily because subjects have to be infected with a non-lethal HIV sample, as to prevent obviously catching the disease. But the non-lethal doses are not seen as a threat by the body's defenses, and hence the body does not develop antigens to eliminate the virus. The cure for AIDS lies thus in creating a mild strain of HIV, which resembles the original version but is non-lethal. Billions of dollars are being poured into this kind of research, in search for a cure before it is too late. The quest for immortality has been a fleeting fancy of many. Many approaches have been tried, from consulting the spiritual realm to cryogenics, freezing the body immediately after death for resurrection in a future when technology to prolong life would have been developed. For those on a budget, you can be decapitated and your head frozen for around £30,000. The mere fact that companies like this exist highlights the demand on science to find more than an anti-wrinkle cream to reduce the visible signs of aging. So far they have found that not all human cells actually age. Some scientists speculate that there is some kind of genetic clock that is ticking in the cells of the body that do die. Why do some animals live for 100 years and others for a few weeks? By studying the cells of a variety of animals, scientists are optimistic about the prospects of doubling the human shelf life in the near future. It seems contradictory that the same people who complain about overpopulation are relentless in ensuring that they do not give up their spot on the earth. Who will benefit from this science? The rich and the greedy, that for good reason fear what waits them in the next life. Because genetic traits are hereditary, it is possible to trace human ancestry by studying commonalities in the genes of different groups. This research has redefined the anthropological origins of humanity. One of the great mysteries of the Bible surrounds the lost tribe of Israel. The search for the lost tribe has been the obsession of many Jewish groups. By tracing genetic hereditary traits, modern research has unraveled some interesting finds. It turns out that one of the lost tribes of Israel's descendants is an African tribe in Zimbabwe called the Lamba people. They can trace their passage from Israel through southern Arabia into Africa. Genetic DNA comparisons show the same traits found in known ancient Jewish tribes to be also present among the men of the Lamba tribe. The proposed theory of evolution has been turned into controversy due to new explosive genetics evidence. The theory, commonly known as the out of Africa theory, states that all the modern racial groups emerged from Africa not too long ago. If this were true, then the genetic drift between the different races would be very small. The other theory states that each race evolved in the major continents of the world on a parallel course. In this case, we would be genetically more dissimilar. A genetic survey sampled the DNA of thousands of racial groups concluded that we are all very closely related. The conclusions of the study made scientific history when it pointed to a tribe in Africa as being the oldest race on Earth and possessing the broadest genetic pool. In simple terms, these people are the ancestors of every single human that ever lived. We all share this African ancestry. We are all family. The population of the world sped past the 6 billion mark on October 12, 1999. The United Nations reported having doubled since 1960 and added 1 billion people in only 12 years. To what lengths would Western policymakers go to reverse current population trends? A review of academic literature and government records suggests the issue of population change surpasses all others in long-range importance. Statistics show that all births above those required to replace adults in the present generation occur in nations that are not politically a part of the West. In fact, fertility in most Western countries is well below the level required even to maintain a stable census. This trend, said French demographer Jean-Claude Chenet in 1990, is sure to involve a reshaping of world political geography to the advantage of the developing nations. Young powers will emerge, basing their strength in large part on their population size and the stimulus it creates, and old powers will fade as their populations decline. The urgency of this situation was emphasized in a 1991 report prepared for the U.S. Army Conference, Long Range Planning. Noting that the implications for the international political order and the balance of world power could be enormous, the document predicted population change could produce an international environment even more menacing to the security prospects of the Western Alliance than the Cold War of the past generation. In the late 1920s, British philosopher Bertrand Russell warned, "It cannot be expected that the most powerful military nations will sit while under other nations, reversing the balance of power by the mere process of breeding." And in the aftermath of World War II, Britain's King George VI established a special panel to study global population trends. Its findings were summed up in a June 1949 headline in the News Chronicle that screamed, "The West dwindles, but the East goes on multiplying. Can we survive as a world power?" The United Nations warned that the population of some developing countries could be decimated in the next few decades because of rapidly rising death rates. Demographers at the United Nations announced that they would drastically reduce earlier projections of global population growth because of rising death rates in the developing world, especially in parts of Africa. The global AIDS epidemic is forcing demographers to dramatically scale back predictions for population growth over the next century, as some African nations brace for losses as high as a quarter of all adults. Developing nations previously expected to show high rates of demographic growth are now headed for population stability in a matter of years.